Nashville's outskirts had always moved at the pace of Sunday mornings, slow, steady, familiar. White picket fences lined Willow Creek Lane, where neighbors waved from porches, and church bells drifted lazily across the air every weekend. On this peaceful street stood two homes that, at first glance, seemed like any others. But inside them lived two families whose faiths would one day collide in a way no one could have foreseen. In the cedar-sided house on the corner lived Pastor Dan and his wife Sarah, Daniel. Across the lawn, in a small brick home trimmed with bright blue shutters, lived the low Carl, Maria, and their Diego and Luke. They were the S. Most neighbors found it beautiful peak. To him, their nightly ritual wasn't a harmless expression of devotion. It was a challenge, a contradiction, a reminder of everything he had preached against for 20 years. As he stood on his porch some evenings, watching the flicker of candlelight across the Lopez yard, something inside him tightened in unease. He refused to. Sarah noticed it first. She saw the way he lingered at the window, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the statue. She saw the way his sermons sharpened, his voice rising whenever he spoke of false images. And she heard the subtle fear in his words, the fear that perhaps he didn't understand everything as clearly as he once. Meanwhile, the Lopez family prayed with a humility that carried across the grass like a whispered hymn. They prayed for their children, for their neighbors, for the lonely, and even without knowing it, for the man who watched them fro. 2. The summer evenings settled over Willow Creek Lane with a softness that usually calmed the neighborhood. But on that night it carried a tension that seemed to pulse beneath the warm air. In the Lopez yard, two candles flickered beside the small white statue of the Virgin Mary, their flames steady despite the slight breeze. Maria's voice rose gently as she prayed the rosary with her children, each word drifting across the lawn like a lullaby. Most nights, the sound brought peace, but on this night, it stirred something very different inside Pastor Daniel Miller. Daniel had spent the afternoon preparing a Sunday sermon about purity of worship. Page after page of scripture lay scattered across his desk, marked in bold ink, highlighted with fury rather than devotion. Each verse he turned to seemed to point him back to one thought. Images lead hearts astray. The words repeated in his mind like a drumbeat he could not silence. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, he stood by the window, watching the silhouette of the Virgin Mary statue glow faintly in the candlelight. In his chest, something snapped. Sarah noticed the change instantly, the way he stood too still, the way his breath came just a little too fast. "Daniel," she whispered gently, "maybe you're reading too much into this. They're just praying. They're not hurting anyone." But the pastor shook his head, eyes fixed on the statue as though it were provoking him. "It's wrong, Sarah," he muttered. "I've preached against this for years, and they do it right in front of us as if truth doesn't matter." There was fear behind his voice, but he didn't recognize it. The fear of questioning his own certainty, the fear of a faith that was suddenly, inexplicably, trembling. Then came the song. Maria began singing a soft Ave Maria, a melody so gentle that even the crickets paused. The notes drifted through Daniel's window, brushing against the edges of his rigid faith like a warm hand on cold stone. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, and in a burst of emotion he could not explain, Daniel marched toward the hall closet. Sarah followed him, alarmed. "Daniel, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He reached inside, grabbed the thick white jug of industrial bleach he used to clean the church's old baptismal font, and held it with the grip of a man preparing for battle. "Daniel," she pleaded, "stop. Think for a moment." But he had stopped thinking the moment he decided he was right. Barefoot, driven by a mix of righteous anger and hidden insecurity, Daniel stepped out into the night. The grass was cool beneath his feet, but he barely felt it. Each step felt like marching toward an enemy that only he could see. Across the yard, the candles glowed softly around the Virgin Mary statue. Diego and Lucia had already gone inside. Only the flame, the flowers, and the quiet presence of the statue remained. Daniel approached, breath shallow, hands trembling not from fear, but from fury he mistook for conviction. He lifted the jug. "There is no queen in heaven," he shouted into the stillness. "Only the Lord himself." And with a violent motion, he poured. Bleach splashed across the statue's robe, its folded hands, its serene face. The harsh chemical scent cut through the night, overwhelming the fragrance of candle wax and roses. For a moment, everything fell silent, even the cicadas stopped their rhythmic hum. Daniel stepped back, chest heaving, waiting for relief, for righteousness, for victory. But none came. Instead, a sudden chill brushed across the yard, a coldness that didn't belong to the warm Tennessee night. The flames of the candles wavered, flickered, then steadied again as if refusing to be extinguished. Daniel's hands began to tingle. First, a faint sting, then a sharper burn, then a wave of pain spiraling up his arms like invisible fire. He gasped, dropping the jug. It rolled across the grass, spilling the last of its contents onto the ground. Daniel stared at his hands in horror as tiny red marks began to rise along his palms, marks that shouldn't have been possible from bleach alone. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He stumbled backward, breath ragged, and ran toward his house, clutching the burning skin that felt as though it were being punished not by chemicals, but by something deeper, something he did not understand. Behind him, the candles around the statue flickered gently, their flames unbroken, glowing like watchful eyes in the dark. The pain in Pastor Daniel's hands did not wait for morning. It began the moment he slammed the back door behind him, a sharp sting that raced across his palms like a fuse igniting from within. By the time he reached the kitchen sink, the tingling had become a relentless burn. He shoved his hands under cold water, gasping as the icy stream hit his skin, but it did nothing, no relief, no change, only heat rising like invisible flames licking at every nerve. Sarah rushed toward him, eyes wide. "Daniel, what happened?" He couldn't answer. He only held his hands beneath the running water, his breath coming in shallow bursts. His palms reddened before her eyes, swelling, blistering along the deep lines of his skin. It was as if the bleach he poured on the statue had turned against him, not chemically, but morally. "Get the keys," Sarah whispered, voice trembling. "We're going to the ER." Minutes later, they sped down the quiet Nashville streets, streetlights streaking past, Daniel gripping his forearms as though his hands no longer belonged to him. Under the harsh hospital lights, nurses rushed him into an exam room. A physician with years etched across his face examined the burns, eyebrows knitting tighter with each passing second. "You're sure this was bleach?" he asked, confused. Daniel nodded weakly. "And you didn't get any industrial acid on you? Any contaminant? Any electrical burn?" "No," Daniel croaked, voice hoarse. "Just bleach." The doctor frowned. "This isn't consistent with that. Bleach irritates, yes. It burns if concentrated. But this," he lifted Daniel's swollen hand gently, "this is deeper, almost like thermal trauma, but without any damage on the surface that matches a chemical reaction." He turned to the nurse. "Take a biopsy. I want labs on chemical traces, tissue necrosis, everything." Daniel sat silently, his hands throbbing in an unbearable rhythm. He avoided looking at Sarah, avoided the memory of what he had done. Every pulse of pain felt like a judgment he didn't want to face. While he suffered in the examination room, something else was happening back on Willow Creek Lane. The Lopez family returned home around the same time, Carlos carrying groceries, Maria guiding the children up the walkway. Lucia froze first. She pointed with a trembling finger. "Papa, the statue." Maria hurried forward, expecting the worst, expecting bleach stains, streaks of white chemical burn, or destroyed flowers. But what she found made her breath hitch. The statue of the Virgin Mary stood untouched. Not a single mark, not one streak. Not even the roses at her feet had wilted. The moonlight glowed against the marble-like surface, as though it had been freshly polished. Carlos approached slowly, suspicion pulling at his brow. He traced his thumb across the robe, expecting residue. Instead, the stone felt smooth and warm. "Maria," he whispered, "la piedra está caliente." The stone, it's warm. Maria stepped closer, and then she saw something even stranger. Beneath the right eye of the Virgin Mary, a small bead of moisture glistened in the candlelight. A tear. It rolled slowly down the statue's cheek before falling onto the ground below. Lucia gasped. Diego crossed himself. Maria pressed her hand to her mouth, trembling. "It's warm," Carlos repeated, touching the tear's trace. "This isn't rain." Within minutes, neighbors began gathering, drawn by hushed whispers and the unspoken electricity in the air. Some stared, some prayed. Some simply stood in disbelief as the small white statue, untouched, unscarred, seemed to glow faintly under the soft Tennessee night. Back in the hospital, the biopsy results arrived. The doctor returned, pale, holding a chart that made no sense. No chemical burns, he said. No toxin, no acid, no allergic markers. It's as if your skin reacted to something that isn't there. Daniel lowered his eyes, unable to speak. But deep inside, beneath the pride, beneath the fear, he already knew. The burns weren't from bleach. They were from what he had done. Outside, on Willow Creek Lane, the Virgin Mary statue stood still and serene, untouched by hatred, unscarred by chemicals, and weeping a single tear beneath the glow of candlelight. By sunrise, Willow Creek Lane no longer felt like the quiet neighborhood it had been the night before. Word moved faster than the morning light passed from porch to porch, text message to text message, until nearly every household within a mile had heard some version of the same breathless clam. The Virgin Mary statue at the Lopez home cried during the night. It started with Mrs. Cunningham, the elderly woman who walked her terrier at dawn. She was the first neighbor to notice the small crowd gathered in front of the Lopez yard, Carlos kneeling, Maria holding her hand over her heart, and two children staring in awe at the statue that now glistened in the last traces of morning dew. Except one glisten wasn't dew at all. When the sun hit the statue's cheek at just the right angle, a faint shimmer appeared, a single tear streak that ran down from the Virgin Mary's eye. Warm to the touch, Carlos had already confirmed. Mrs. Cunningham didn't need convincing. She reached for her phone and snapped a photo. Within 10 minutes, it was on Facebook with the caption, "Is anyone else seeing this? The Virgin Mary. She looks like she's crying." Her post was shared 17 times in the first half hour. But it was a teenager, a high school sophomore named Jordan Hale, who turned the moment into something larger. Riding his bike to meet friends, he stopped as he saw the crowd forming, parents holding coffee cups, kids pointing toward the statue, neighbors whispering like they were standing before something sacred. Jordan pulled out his phone and hit record. His video lasted 20 seconds. It showed the two candles still burning from the night before, the pristine statue untouched by bleach or damage, and the faint glimmer of what looked like a tear trail. As he panned closer, the camera mic caught someone in the background whispering, "Smell that? It's like jasmine and roses." There were no jasmine plants, no rose bushes nearby, but the scent was unmistakable, sweet, warm, and strangely comforting. Jordan uploaded the video to TikTok with the caption, "Something crazy is happening on Willow Creek Lane." No filter, no edits. The algorithm took care of the rest. By noon, the video had 300,000 views. By mid-afternoon, it passed 1.2 million. People in the comments argued, prayed, joked, debated. That scent part gave me chills. Bro, that's condensation. Then why's it warm? I'm not even Catholic, but I feel peaceful watching this. Y'all, I'm crying. I can't explain it. Local news crews arrived before sunset. Reporters stood in the Lopez driveway, trying to sound objective while clearly unsettled. Cameras rolled as the statue seemed to glow softly in the dying light, its surface reflecting gold, almost alive. One reporter paused mid-sentence. The camera kept going. She blinked fast, staring at the tear streak like she had forgotten every word in her script. Finally, she whispered, "Some here are calling it a coincidence. Others are calling it a miracle." Meanwhile, Pastor Daniel watched it all unfold from his hospital bed. The TV in the corner replayed Jordan's viral clip on a loop. Every new comment, every new share, every new visitor arriving at the Lopez home felt like a weight pressing deeper into his chest. The statue he had doused in bleach was untouched. The hands that poured the bleach were burned, and thousands of strangers across the country were now watching the evidence. Back at the Lopez home, more neighbors gathered as the afternoon turned into evening. Some prayed aloud, others stood in reverent silence. Carlos and Maria opened their yard, offering water, tissues, a place to sit. They didn't preach or claim anything, only welcomed those who felt drawn to the quiet presence of the Virgin Mary, standing calm beneath the gentle flicker of candlelight. And as night fell again, that strange and beautiful fragrance, jasmine, roses, and something unnameable drifted through the air once more, settling over Willow Creek Lane like a blessing no one had expected and no one could explain. The hospital room felt too white, too bright, too sterile for the storm churning inside Pastor Daniel Miller. Machines hummed softly beside him. Monitors blinked with calm indifference, yet nothing in the room matched the chaos tightening around his heart. His hands were wrapped in thick bandages, pulsing with waves of heat that refused to settle. Sarah sat beside him, her fingers lightly resting on his forearm, but even her presence couldn't quiet the rising panic in his chest. The news coverage played on the mounted television across the room. Over and over, the same 20-second TikTok clip replayed Jordan's shaky camera, capturing the candlelight, the tear streak glistening on the Virgin Mary's cheek, the whispered scent of roses floating in the background. The reporter's trembling voice filled the silence. Some are calling it a coincidence. Others call it a miracle. Daniel couldn't look away. Not because he believed it, not because he refused to, but because somewhere deep beneath his pastor's training, beneath the rigid lines he had drawn around his faith, something fragile was beginning to crack. The burns on his hands were getting worse. The doctor couldn't explain why. Bleach didn't cause this kind of damage. Heat didn't come from chemicals like this. No toxin was found in his tissue samples. And every time the doctor listed things that could not have caused his injuries, Daniel felt the truth pressing harder against him. This wasn't science. This wasn't chance. This was something else. Sarah watched his face carefully, sensing what he was fighting. "Daniel," she whispered, "you have to tell me what happened. All of it." He swallowed hard. Shame gathered in his throat. I wanted to stop them," he muttered. "I wanted to make a point." His eyes stayed locked on the TV as he spoke. "I thought I was protecting God from a lie." Sarah's eyes softened not with anger, but with heartbreak. And now? He didn't answer. He couldn't. Across town at the Lopez home, more neighbors arrived, some carrying Bibles, others clutching rosaries, some simply standing still as if afraid to speak. The footage played live on Daniel's TV screen. Men and women praying side by side, children touching the base of the statue, elderly neighbors holding tissues as the scent of roses drifted through the crowd. Daniel gripped the blankets, trying to steady his breath. For years he had preached that Catholics placed Mary above God. For years he had warned his congregation against anything resembling a statue, an image, a ritual. He'd insisted that reverence for Mary diluted the purity of worship, that anything beyond Scripture was deception. But the people in that video weren't deceived. They weren't idolaters. They were moved, comforted, some even healed. One woman in the comments claimed the pain in her joints vanished as she prayed beside the statue. Another said she felt peace for the first time in a decade. And that scent, jasmine, roses, something holy no one could explain. Daniel closed his eyes. Behind the darkness, he saw the moment he poured bleach over the statue. He heard his own voice shouting into the night. He felt again the surge of righteous anger that had driven him across the lawn. But now that anger looked small, like a scared child, raising his voice to feel strong. He whispered a thought he never expected to admit. "What if I was wrong?" Sarah squeezed his arm gently, tears gathering in her eyes. "Daniel, faith without humility becomes pride. Maybe this isn't about being right." He turned toward her, raw, wounded, trembling. "Then what is it about?" She looked at the screen where the Virgin Mary's tear glowed beneath the sunset. "Maybe," she said softly, "it's about grace finding you, even when you try to run from it." The words landed deep in him, settling where fear and guilt had been crowding for hours. His hands throbbed with another wave of burning, but this time, the pain felt different, almost like a call, a reminder, a truth he could no longer ignore. For the first time since the night he lifted the bleach jug, Pastor Daniel felt something rising inside him that he had not allowed himself to feel in years. The beginning of surrender. Night fell gently over St. Thomas Hospital, settling into the hallways like a blanket of muted shadows. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, monitors beeped steadily, and nurses moved from room to room with practiced grace. But inside room 214, where Pastor Daniel Miller lay unable to sleep, the air felt heavier, thick with guilt, fear, and something he hadn't yet named. His bandaged hands pulsed with a deep, throbbing heat. He tried to distract himself by murmuring scripture under his breath, but every verse he recited only looped back to the same invisible wall. He had preached righteousness, yet acted out of anger. He had condemned idolatry, yet felt his own heart burning with something darker. He longed for clarity, but clarity felt farther away than ever. A soft knock broke the silence. The door opened, and Nurse Anna Rodriguez stepped inside. She was in her early 50s, with warm eyes and a silver rosary tucked discreetly under her badge. She checked his vitals with professional calm, But as she turned to leave, she hesitated. "Pastor," she said gently, "may I ask you something?" Daniel looked up, exhausted. "Yes. You're in a lot of pain," she said, noticing the tension in his jaw. "And not all of it is physical." She paused, her voice lowering. "Would you allow me to pray for you?" For a moment, Daniel stiffened. Old reflexes rose in him, reflexes shaped by years of sermons, warning against ritualistic prayers, intercessors, Mary worship. But something in Anna's expression stopped him. There was no agenda there, no debate, no doctrine, only compassion. He gave a slow nod. Anna stepped to his bedside and gently rested her hand above his bandaged ones, careful not to touch the wounds. Her voice dropped to a soft murmur, a prayer shaped by centuries of whispered pleas and midnight devotions. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." The words floated through the dim room like a lullaby carried by candlelight. Daniel's breath hitched, part resistance, part relief. The calm in her voice felt foreign, and yet strangely familiar, like something he'd witnessed in childhood but had forgotten. Anna finished the prayer, then quietly slipped her rosary beneath his pillow. "She'll take care of you," she whispered, and then she left. That night, Daniel drifted into a sleep he couldn't fight. At first it was darkness, thick, endless. Then a soft glow appeared, spreading like dawn through fog. He found himself standing in a field unlike any on earth, bathed in a light that wasn't sunlight but something warmer, living, moving. A breeze, though there was no wind, brushed past him, carrying the scent of jasmine and roses. Then he saw her. A woman dressed in flowing white and blue stood a short distance away, her veil shifting gently as if stirred by unseen hands. She wasn't towering or intimidating. She didn't blaze with fire or thunder. Instead, compassion radiated from her, like warmth from a hearth in winter. Her eyes met his. They were not human eyes. They were deeper, like they held oceans of understanding and centuries of love. Daniel tried to speak, but no words came. His throat tightened, not with fear, but with the unmistakable feeling of being known completely. Every failure, every prideful thought, every anger he had justified as righteousness. She stepped closer. He felt the warmth before she even reached him. "Do not be afraid," she said, her voice soft as breath. "You have wounded love, but love can still heal you." Daniel's knees gave out. He fell into the glowing field, tears he didn't realize he'd been holding streaming down his face. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to justify, but she didn't let him. Virgin Mary knelt beside him and took his burned hands in hers. The moment her fingers touched the bandages, a wave of warmth surged through him. Not heat like fire, but warmth like mercy, like something being mended from the inside out. The pain that had filled his body for days dissolved beneath her touch, replaced by a peace so profound it felt like standing in the very heart of grace. "Truth," she whispered, "always answers with mercy." The light around her grew brighter, flooding everything until he could see nothing at all. When Daniel gasped awake, morning light filled the hospital room. His pillow was slightly damp from tears, and beneath it, the rosary Anna had left for him lay warm, almost as if it had been held in loving hands just moments before. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin hospital blinds, washing room 214 inches pale gold. The world outside was waking up slowly, cars humming on the distant highway, nurses beginning their rounds, coffee carts rolling down the hall. But inside the room where Pastor Daniel Miller lay, something entirely different had awakened. Something no one in the building, not even Daniel himself, was prepared to understand. His eyes opened with a start. For a moment, he thought the dream was still happening. The field of light, the scent of jasmine, the woman in white and blue whose voice seemed to echo from eternity. But the room was ordinary again, cold, colorless, hospital-like, except something felt wrong. Or rather, something felt right, in a way that made no sense. His hands, they didn't hurt. Not the throbbing agony that had kept him awake for 2 nights. Not the burning under the skin that no ointment or cooling gel could soothe. There was only warmth, gentle, steady, almost like a pulse. Hands trembling, Daniel slowly reached for the bandages. He hesitated. If this was a hallucination, a moment of false hope, he wasn't sure he could bear it. But some quiet courage whispered through him echoes of the voice in his dream. "Do not be afraid." He unwrapped the first layer of gauze, then another, and then another. Sarah, half asleep in the chair beside him, jolted upright. "Daniel, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. When the final strip fell away, silence filled the room. His hands, once blistered, darkened, and raw, were whole, smooth, unscarred, perfectly renewed, with only a faint pink glow like new skin touched by dawn. Sarah covered her mouth, tears already spilling. "Oh my God! Daniel, your hands!" A nurse walking past caught the sound and stepped inside. She froze. Then she ran for the doctor. Within minutes, the room filled with medical staff. Dr. Grant, a man with decades of burn trauma expertise, examined Daniel's hands in stunned disbelief. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "Yesterday your tissue was necrotic. We scheduled debridement for this afternoon." He looked again, shaking his head. "There's not a trace of damage, not even healed scars. It's as if—" He didn't finish, because there was no medical sentence that could end that thought. Daniel looked down at the hands that had attacked a statue, hands that had poured bleach out of anger, hands that had trembled with pride masquerading as righteousness. Now they looked like the hands of a child, soft, new, redeemed. When the doctor left, Sarah knelt beside the bed, gripping Daniel's restored fingers. "Tell me," she whispered, "what happened?" He swallowed hard. "I saw her. I don't know how. I don't know if it was a dream, but she touched me." His voice cracked, and everything changed. 3 days later, the Sunday service at Willow Street Baptist Church overflowed with people. Not only church members, but neighbors, skeptics, Catholics from several miles away, even reporters who had covered the statue miracle. Everyone had heard rumors. Everyone wanted to hear his side. Daniel stepped onto the pulpit with slow, reverent steps. His hands rested on the wooden lectern, glowing in the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows. Sarah stood near the front pew, tears shining in her eyes. For a moment, the room held its breath. "I have something to confess," Daniel said, voice steady but thick with emotion. "I did something terrible. I acted out of anger, not faith. Pride, not truth. I poured bleach on the Virgin Mary statue in our neighbor's yard, and I believed I was doing it for God." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Daniel lifted his healed hands. But God did not answer with punishment. He answered with mercy. The church fell utterly silent. Daniel's voice softened. "I saw her, the mother of our Lord, and she did not accuse me. She did not condemn me. She touched my wounds, and they healed." Murmurs, gasps, tears. He looked over at the Lopez family, seated together near the aisle. "And I owe you, the Lopez family, not only an apology, but my gratitude, because your faith opened a door mine had been afraid to approach." Maria began to cry. Carlos bowed his head. Daniel stepped down from the pulpit, walked toward them, and knelt pastor of a Baptist church right at their feet. "I hurt what you love," he whispered, "and you responded with forgiveness. Thank you." Maria stood and gently lifted him to his feet. "She showed mercy," she said. "We only followed." In that moment, something passed through the church like a breath of wind that carried warmth instead of cold, unity instead of division. Protestants and Catholics, once separated by walls of doctrine, bowed their heads together, and in the center aisle, under the soft glow of colored light, Pastor Daniel whispered the sentence that would echo far beyond Nashville. "I poured bleach on love, and love washed me clean." In the days following Pastor Daniel's confession, Willow Creek Lane transformed in ways no one could have predicted. What began as a neighborhood scandal now drew pilgrims, skeptics, journalists, clergy, and everyday families who simply wanted to stand near something that felt like grace. Yet the most unexpected transformation wasn't happening among visitors. It was unfolding quietly between two communities that had spent years standing on opposite sides of the theological divide. The Lopez family's front yard, once just another suburban patch of grass, had become a place of prayer. Not a shrine sanctioned by any authority, not a spectacle meant to attract crowds, but a simple space where hearts felt drawn. The Virgin Mary statue, still pristine, still bearing the faint shimmer that first appeared the night of the Bleach attack, remained at the center, calm, serene, untouched. One evening, a week after Daniel's public confession, something remarkable occurred. A small group from Willow Street Baptist Church walked down the sidewalk, carrying folding chairs and Bibles. Across the street, a handful of Catholics arrived with rosaries, candles, and a portable speaker softly playing hymns. At first, the two groups hesitated, unsure how to mingle. Old habits ran deep, Baptists to one side, Catholics to the other. Then Daniel arrived. He walked slowly toward the statue, his restored hands clasped in quiet reverence. He knelt not to the stone, but in gratitude to the God who had used it to pierce his pride. The moment his knees touched the ground, a subtle shift rippled through the crowd. A Baptist deacon followed, then a Catholic grandmother, then two teenagers wearing sports hoodies, friends from different churches who had never prayed together before. Soon the entire group, Bible readers and rosary whisperers, knelt side by side. No competition, no arguments, just a still, humble peace. Maria wiped her eyes as she watched. "This," she whispered to Carlos, "is how heaven heals." The local news station captured the moment live, their camera panning across faces lined with tears and softened by candlelight. The anchor, usually composed and detached, spoke with a crack in her voice. "It appears Nashville is witnessing something beyond theological lines, a unity born not of debate but of shared reverence." The movement did not end there. At the hospital where Daniel's wounds had miraculously healed, nurses and staff petitioned the administration to place a small statue of the Virgin Mary in the garden beside the fountain. It wasn't about dogma, they made that clear. It was about gratitude. Gratitude for the peace patients found there. Gratitude for what they had witnessed in room 214. Gratitude for the quiet strength they believed had visited them in their darkest shifts. A bronze plaque was placed beneath the new statue. "For all who suffer, may mercy be their healing." Every morning before sunrise, nurses left fresh flowers, sometimes roses, sometimes lilies, sometimes wildflowers gathered from roadside stands. Doctors, regardless of denomination, paused at the garden on their way to work, letting the silence settle their hearts before facing another day. And then came the most surprising development of all. Pastor Daniel extended an invitation, formal, heartfelt, to Father Michael Torres, the Catholic priest from Street Ann's Parish, 4 miles away. He asked IM to join the Baptist congregation for a shared evening of prayer. Some people thought it would never happen. Some worried it would spark conflict. Others whispered it was impossible. But 2 weeks later, the sanctuary of Willow Street Baptist was overflowing. Father Michael entered in his ample black cassock, carrying a small wooden crucifix. Daniel met him at the aisle, offering a firm embrace, not the stiff handshake of tolerance, but the genuine welcome of a brother who had finally learned humility. Together they hosted what became known as the Evening of Unity. No theological debates, no attempts to convert, no arguments over doctrine, just prayer. They began with the hymn Amazing Grace, voices rising through the rafters like a warm wind. Then, at Father Michael's quiet request, they allowed a moment of Marian prayer. Not everyone participated, but no one protested. Some simply bowed their heads, others listened. Some whispered along softly, testing unfamiliar words that somehow felt gentle rather than threatening. And something shifted. A Baptist woman placed her hand on the shoulder of a Catholic stranger beside her. A teenage boy who had never prayed out loud found himself murmuring along. An elderly Catholic widower wiped tears as he heard Protestants singing beside him. The room felt lighter, as if walls built over centuries had thinned to the point of transparency. By the teemee, the candles burned low. Daniel stood before the congregation and offered a final reflection. "There is more truth in humility," he said, "than in 1,000 arguments. And there is more of God's heart in unity than in winning debates. We stand here tonight as one family, not because we believe the same in every way, but because mercy has brought us together." The sanctuary erupted in quiet applause, not loud, but reverent, like a heartbeat shared by many. That night marked the beginning of a tradition. Every month, the Evening of Unity returned, bringing Catholics, Protestants, and even unbelievers who longed for peace. And on Willow Creek Lane, the Virgin Mary statue glowed softly beneath the night sky, its presence no longer a point of contention, but a symbol of what grace can do when hearts finally surrender to it. 10 years passed, but Willow Creek Lane never returned to the quiet street it once was. Time softened the edges of the miracle, but it did not erase it. If anything, the years only deepened its meaning, shaping lives, restoring families, and stitching together a community once marked by division. The Virgin Mary statue still stood in the Lopez yard, though the garden around it had weathered with age. The paint on the fence had faded, the rose bushes bloomed less often, and the once bright shutters now showed gentle signs of time. But the statue's smooth, white, serene remained unchanged. And every year, without fail, something extraordinary happened. On August 15th, the Feast of the Assumption, white lilies bloomed at the base of the statue. No one planted them, no one watered the soil or tended the earth. The Lopez children, now adults, scattered across different states, confirmed it each year when they returned home. The lilies always appeared overnight. Their fragrance lingered for days, a mix of jasmine, roses, and something else no one could quite name. Visitors still came, some out of curiosity, some for hope, some because they remembered what had happened here and wanted to feel even a trace of it again. Carlos and Maria were older now, their steps slower, their hair silvered, but every evening they lit 2 candles just as they had always done, one for Thanksgiving and one for someone who doesn't yet know they're being prayed for. Across town, the hospital garden had become a place of refuge. Nurses who didn't even work there a decade ago learned the story from co-workers who whispered it like a sacred tale. The small statue of the Virgin Mary stood beside the fountain, its bronze surface glowing at sunrise. Patients paused before surgeries, doctors paused before long shifts, janitors paused during night rounds. Some prayed, others imply breathed. No one left untouched. As for Pastor Daniel Miller, his life had changed in ways he never imagined. His sermons grew quieter, gentler, rooted less in argument and more in compassion. He no longer preached against other denominations. Instead, he urged his congregation to seek the heart of God in humility, mercy, and reconciliation. People said they felt something different in his presence, a softness, a sincerity forged through fire. Pride divides, he often said. Mercy heals. Every year on the anniversary of the miracle, Daniel and Sarah joined the Lopez family at dusk. They stood together, Baptist and Catholic, friends bound not by doctrine but by grace, holding candles as they prayed an Ave Maria under the Tennessee sky. Some at times a warm breeze would pass, carrying the scent of lilies down the street. No one ever spoke when it happened. No one needed to. Some called it the miracle of Nashville. Others called it coincidence. But for those who had lived it, the truth ran deeper. It was the story of what happens when heaven bends low enough to touch a wounded heart, and when anger becomes surrender, pride becomes humility, and ashes become grace. If this story moved you, please support the channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Single Dad Tales so you never miss another powerful story of redemption, faith, and second chances. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life.